Every day Will Stancil has such a terrible take. I gotta say something. I gotta make a video because tweets are not enough. This guy has so many views and so many fucking pathetic stands. I mean, he has a lot of haters, obviously, but he manages to finagle this thing. The only people who hate me are Nazis and far crazy left. No, if you're a true liberal, you should also hate Will Stancil. He's just such a billionaire patsy. He's such a billionaire agent. Everything he says is designed to make sure all this happens. For example, the latest fucking tweet. There are 10 times as many No Kings protesters as there are civil rights protesters in the 60s. Oh my God. This should be offensive to anyone who actually cares about these issues. And I'm going to tell you why. The definition of what it means to be a protester has been so diluted by these CIA agents posing as resistance that and they want you to feel like you're resistance by doing nothing at all that could possibly disrupt the system. So that's why he's able to say it's like how MAGA says there's 10 times as many rates of autism. It must be the vaccines and the circumcision, not neglecting to realize the definition of autism has greatly changed over time. And in a similar way, the definition of a progressive protester has been so mutilated by these people. They've made resistance staying where you are, staying safe, staying local where your views are the majority, giving Jay Grabber and the Onion money so you buy their shit and put it on this pussy can't be grabbed hat with the Mun Cerebrus shirt and sitting only amongst people like you who agree with you, where MAGAs are the minority, and bitching. In the 60s, they just called that somebody who's a dissenter. They did not call that person a protester. My grandfather was like that. He wasn't fake. He had extremely strong ethics, but he was vocally against Jim Crow. He taught his family to be against Jim Crow. He would, when the news would come on, they talk about the real civil rights activists who were taking risks, who were going down there where they could get beat up, killed, murdered, imprisoned, where they were not the majority. They would literally, you know what the civil rights leaders did? They gathered like-minded individuals, mostly from the North, and they ran bus rides to the heart of Jim Crow, where they were not the fucking majority. They were not sitting in Starbucks or a vegan cafe in the North being like, I hate these MAGAs, and there's like one or two MAGAs near them. They literally got on a bus, drove down there in a mixed, not segregated bus, and they did risk death, beatings, murders, imprisonment, because they were no longer the majority, but they made them visible in these places where this ideology was happening and it was coded in law. Those people were the civil rights protesters. In the North, there was a much larger group of people who were just against it, taught their families to be against it. When they watched the news, they said, I'm against this. And amongst their friends, they discussed how they were against it. That would be like my grandfather. Back in those days, people like that were not called civil rights protesters because they weren't. While they were ideologically against it and stifling its continuation, teaching their families and everybody else around them, they were not actually taking those risks to make the changes where that was not the case, where it was not the majority opinion. And people were suffering and it was coded in law. So they were not considered protesters. What the CIA, the billionaires, and their fake progressive mouthpieces have done is made you think the kind of person my grandfather was, ethically against this, teaching his family to be against this, talking to others, like-minded people to be against this, that is resistance. And as a result of doing nothing being resistance, there's no resistance. Because the person ends up thinking, if wearing a hat that I paid Jay Grabber for and sitting amongst my friends where we all agree with each other, and not really taking those risks to travel where this is actually going on, where this view is not the majority. In fact, we're encouraged to say, don't bother talking to them. They're a lost cause. Don't bother talking to them. Don't, you have to isolate yourself from MAGAs. You just got to stay with people who agree with you in the North, or the liberal cities in the South. Don't go near them. They're tainted. They're evil Nazis. They're evil Nazis, so you can't bother making changes. Shut them out. That is what they've trained them to do because that makes sure it happens. So they've trained them to think doing nothing is being part of resistance, where you hold a big No Kings protest in a liberal city in the South or the North where it's liberal, where there's no MAGAs around you. Maybe you'll see one or two shirts like, I hate you, but you're in the majority. Buy shit from them, put it on where it's totally safe, and you're not going to make any change because there's no one around you disagrees with you. Because you've also been brainwashed by the CIA and the billionaires, these fake progressive leaders, to don't even bother talking to them. An ethical liberal shuts out every MAGA and doesn't even deal with them. They can't change. They're evil. They've made you accept those views to brainwash you to let it happen. And so that motherfucker is called resistance today. It was not the case in the 60s. In the 60s, they had real resistors, and they were a minority of the larger group of dissenters. Today, because of the CIA and the billionaires, the dissenters are the resistors. And by design, they're encouraged to do nothing. And not only are dissenters resistors, meaning just by not liking this, they're considered resistance. They're really not doing anything to make change. They are simultaneously brainwashed. Actions that really would be resistance are bad. Like, you shouldn't try talking to MAGAs. Don't go near them. Shut them out. What, you expect me to feel bad by listening to them? How do you think the people doing bus rides felt? Making change is hard. That's why so few people were civil rights activists. If whether you're black or you're white, do you want to go down to a place where in like fucking Alabama where they're like, N-words, get out of here, you disgusting race traitor? Don't you think they felt bad? Making change is not easy. That's why in history, those people were lauded as uniquely special. They they dedicated their life feeling like shit to what's right. The real civil rights activists did that. They had to hear that, go through that, and then be beat and imprisoned. You motherfuckers are trained by the CIA and the billionaires, then your mental health is too, but you can't do it. Pointless. No change has ever, all the changes happen like that. You cannot compare the civil rights resistors to these fuckers brainwashed and created by the CIA so it happens, where they think going near MAGAs is beneath them, their mental health is too fragile, they shouldn't even bother because you can't educate anybody. Like, how do they make progressives think education is pointless? The catchphrase progressives used to use is ignorance, meaning if you believe most things are social, by definition, racist views are ignorance. They now believe in this spiritual module where you're just bad and it's just a labor that you can't possibly bear for no reason to go near them. So they've reframed resistance, isolating yourself amongst people who agree with you, where your views are the majority, and buying shit and wearing it. That's resistance now. When back in the 60s, people like that would never call themselves resistors because they were doing nothing to resist. I mean, they were dissenters and they were against it. But resistance has a specific word. Why do you think the Arabic word for resistance is struggle? Because resisting is hard. They've brainwashed people doing nothing is resistance. And when people think doing nothing is resistance, they won't take the extra steps to actually resist. And that's exactly what billionaires want. When this piece of shit Will Stancil says there's 10 times as many resistors in 1960, what he's really saying is there's no resistors at all. Because they've redefined the definition of resistor to be somebody who's merely ideologically against this but takes no risks, which was a huge group of people in the 1960s. They just were not counted as resistance because they had real resistance then. You think it feels bad to talk to a MAGA? How do you think black people on bus rides felt when they were being called N-words and like with lynchings? That felt way worse than having to talk to your MAGA sister or cousin, where none of that shit's even remotely a threat to you. But you can't even do that. Your mental health is too precious. There's a billionaire, fake progressive leader, Patty. You can't possibly take any risks or feel bad at all. Just sit amongst your liberal friends and buy my shirt. Buy a ticket to AOC and Bernie's I Don't Like This tour. You're doing just as much work as the people in the 60s who were civil rights resistance. You're also resistance too. Here's the real, there's no resistance. None whatsoever, because they've redefined the definition of resistance to mean doing nothing by design. There's nobody taking those risks, getting a group of progressives together and going into MAGA heartland, being like, look what you're doing. Look at it. We're here to show you what you're doing. You're hurting yourself and you're hurting everybody else and you're hurting your grandkids. Nobody's doing that. They're sitting in Chicago or places where their fucking views are all mainstream and then bouncing it off each other. Guess what? Loads of people were doing that in the 60s. My grandfather was doing that. I'm not saying my grandfather was fake. He would be fake if he called himself a civil rights resistor. But back then, nobody was that disgustingly narcissistic, where when they're taking no risks, they're calling themselves resistance. Today, everyone's that disgustingly narcissistic. And at this point, progressivism is a fashion statement. And the CIA and billionaires made sure of it. The shit you're doing, you should be ashamed to call yourself a resistor. You could call yourself an ideological dissenter and you wouldn't be wrong and you wouldn't be fake like my grandfather did. But if you're calling yourself any form of resistance and you're taking no real fucking risks, you're a little protester in a city where the cops mostly agree with you because they're like minority and they're more left leaning, and everyone around you mostly agrees with you. And so you bought your little nice 50 Mind Cerebra shirt and your pussy hat and your fucking burn ice, dismantle ice poster board where everyone agrees with you, the cops, your leaders, and that's your idea of protest? Talking to people who agree with you? Then you're fake. You don't really mean this. You don't care about it. And the audacity that you call yourself resistance is because you're such a narcissist. You want the same credit as the people in the 60s who really took these risks. They really felt bad. Not only do they feel bad, but they fucking risk their lives to make the changes we need. You feel like feeling bad for a second is too great a risk because CIA agents like Emily Dean's on Darth are training you that way. Just isolate yourself. You can't bother to, you can't, too much of a labor of emotion to talk to your MAGA relative. There's no point anyway. There's no point. Can you imagine what Jim Crow South was like? And they literally tried and it worked. And you think your MAGA relative or MAGAs are too far gone to talk to? You piece of shit. You're a piece of shit if you call yourself resistor and that's all you're doing. You're either a piece of shit or you're so fucking brainwashed that you are a neutralized progressive that you think what you're doing is resistance versus a fucking social display to people who already agree with you. And the reason that there's 10 times as many resistors is because there's actually no progressives. So the people calling themselves resistors are like the kind of people like my grandpa, except they're so fake and they mean it so little. They have the audacity to call what they're doing resistance. Whereas back then, real ethical people would never call that resistance. They'd say, I'm against this, like many people in the North, but I'm not taking that extra step to risk my family and risk my life to stop it. I would never call that being a resistor. But there were many people like that. And they were very brave and laudable and took huge risks. Today, yeah, no one's doing that. No one's getting on a fucking bus and going down to MAGA Heartland and bringing real education, what you're doing, what you're about, where the MAGA cops could arrest them and the MAGA town could beat them. You're actually trained by agents not to, that you're too good for that. Too good. You can't possibly feel it. I want you to think about the fucking conundrum that they're saying we've been taken over by fascists. The same fucking billionaires that were running George Bush and all these and Obama, it's the same fucking people. That you're too good to feel bad talking to a MAGA. But in order to make the actual civil rights movement happen, those people were talking to the most virulent racists in Alabama, where they could kill them. If you call yourself a resistor and you're just sitting with people like you where the cops agree with you, you're disgusting. If you had shame, you'd be ashamed to do that. Fake ass.